Mhm. 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 Awesome. Mhm. Mhm. Uh, okay, I think we can start now. Okay, let me all right. Okay, hi everybody. Can you all okay. Can you hear me? Okay. All right. Welcome. My name is Wai Cho, and I'm the training coordinator at the Temple Small Business Development Center. The Temple SBDCs helps small businesses start and grow. We do this through our no-cost consulting and a variety of low to no-cost webinars and training programs. We are proud to be a part of our national accredited network of SBDCs with over 1,000 centers across the United States. You have joined us today for legal formation. A copy of today's PowerPoint will be sent to all attendees, and all attendees have been muted. We encourage you to post any questions in the chat or the Q&A box. Now I'll turn the floor over to Tony.
Good afternoon, everybody, and thank you for joining us today. Looking forward to this presentation, which we do on a quarterly basis, and always a pleasure to collaborate with Temple's SBDC and to help all of you get access to the information that you need. So I am an attorney. I'm the managing partner at Lopes Law LLC. We help entrepreneurs with everything from contracts, negotiations, formation, launching, scaling, mergers and acquisitions, tax law, intellectual property, franchise law, and a variety of other areas. So if you need any help after today's webinar, please feel free to reach out to my email info@lopeslawllc.com. And we can always schedule a free consultation to talk a little bit about what's going on in your world and how we might be able to help you get to what you need. Okay. In addition to all of that, I also have my own small business separate from my firm, where we produce podcasts largely for nonprofit organizations these days. As a matter of fact, I'm the executive producer and director of a podcast called Believe in Progress. It's a podcast for the American Association for Cancer Research Foundation. So you could do a big help today to me would be to go to either YouTube, Apple Podcasts, Spotify, or wherever you listen to podcasts, search for Believe in Progress, listen to a few episodes, follow the show, give them a 5-star review, and share it with someone else, especially if you or someone else has been touched by cancer in your own life. Now, a disclaimer related to this particular webinar. This is not a webinar intended to provide you with legal advice. It's intended to be for informational purposes only. And so it's not a substitute for professional legal advice, consultation, or any other form of advice. Again, I would recommend strongly that if you need help or you want to have a conversation or even have a free initial consultation with us, contact me directly at info@lopeslawllc.com, or you can call 267-777-9117. That's our firm's main number. And one of our receptionists will set you up with a callback from me. Okay. So again, if you need help, make sure you contact either our firm or another law firm. Temple SBDC, and our law firm make no warranties or representations about anything related to this webinar aside from its use for informational purposes. Okay. So what are we going to be talking about today? So first and foremost, we're going to be talking about why, if you haven't already, you should form an entity, and probably hire a lawyer to help you do so for your business venture, whatever that venture may be. So even if you're just a solo person, maybe doing a side hustle, we still strongly recommend that you create a business entity. And spoiler alert, as you can see on the third, major bullet there, we're going to recommend that most likely what you need to form is a LLC, a limited liability company. Now, we'll talk a little bit about that in this webinar, why we think that's the best entity for most people, and also why you should be filing for a proper business entity for your business, and what all the types of benefits are to doing so. Okay. We'll talk a little bit about the different types of entities, but we're not going to spend a ton of time on that because I don't want to get into the detailed sort of weeds of differences between the entities. We'll talk also about the first documents that you're going to need to give life to your business. That's why you should hire an attorney to help you form your business entity, because you are going to need legal documents for any business entity that you create, especially a corporation, especially a limited liability company, and an attorney should be looking over and creating those documents for you. We'll also talk a little bit about some of the agreements that you might need at the beginning of your business, maybe in that first 6 months, 12 months, 18 months of your business venture. Even if you're already in business, I'm hoping that this information will be useful to you so that you can see what the best practices are. And maybe if you've missed some of those things, you can correct them sooner rather than later and avoid a major issue later on in the life cycle of your business. We'll talk a lot about why ignoring this advice will cost you way more than the fees associated with getting good legal representation, and why that good legal representation is in fact important. Okay, so let's start from the top. Why should you even form an entity? So first and foremost, of course, you can start doing business as what's called a sole proprietor. If it's just you by yourself, you set up a lemonade stand, you start mowing people's lawns, you start a landscaping business, you start an interior design business, and you decide, me, Anthony Lopes, I'm going to start doing Anthony Lopes interior design, and I'm just going to start taking on clients. That is what's called a sole proprietorship. One person by themselves doing business. The issue with that is you have no liability protection. So first and foremost, you're going to have issues because you're completely exposed. So if one of your clients sues you, if somebody falls on a job site, if someone's allergic to a product that you sell, if someone suffers some harm because of a service that you provided, you are putting yourself in the crosshairs of a lawsuit that is completely accessible to all of your personal property. So you have no liability protection. That's what we mean by that. Whereas if you form an entity, a properly formed business entity can offer you significant limited liability protection, and therefore you would be able to restrict a potential creditor or someone who sues you from being able to access your personal assets. To do so, we need a properly formed entity, and we need to follow certain formalities. That's the second benefit of forming an entity, is it kind of forces you into this flow of following the proper formalities of separating your business and your business assets from your personal assets. And that's a really important part in terms of limited liability protection. And again, why an experienced attorney is going to be able to help you make sure that you understand the best practices that you need to be following and all of those formalities that you should be doing in your business to avoid problems later. Not just liability problems, but also problems with cash flow and things like that, all of those things are related. So following proper formalities within the structure of a business entity is naturally going to help you get into a better flow in your business activities and help you to avoid some of the major issues and cash flow problems that could occur at a later time. Last but not least, there are significant tax benefits to having a properly formed entity. You can expense certain things in an entity that you cannot expense if you are a sole proprietor. Again, we won't get into the details of every single thing that you can or cannot expense. You can expense significantly more with an LLC or an S corporation. We'll get into the differences in those entities in a minute than you can as a sole proprietor. So you definitely want to consider forming an entity for those three major reasons, if not several other ancillary reasons that also exist. So where should you form your entity? Well, the answer to that question is that you should typically form it in your state of domicile, meaning the state that you are a resident of. So if you're like me, you're a resident in Pennsylvania, more likely than not, you should just form your business entity in Pennsylvania. No need to really overcomplicate things and go file in Delaware or file in Nevada or file in Wyoming or another state that you think, because maybe you read something on the internet or on Reddit or on social media, that there's going to be major savings by doing so. Most of the time, there are some pros and cons to filing in different states, but most of the time, you're going to be better off filing in your home state. It's going to be a lot simpler, administratively less burdensome. So taking up less of your actual time, having to manage the fact that your business is filed somewhere else. You can be your own registered agent if you file in your state of domicile. And you can avoid a lot of unnecessary headaches and costs associated with filing in an outside state. Now, sometimes people will come to me and say, well, my accountant said they can file my business entity for $250 or $500. If your accountant tells you that, find a new accountant. That is a very irresponsible thing for an accountant to tell their client. Just like I would never tell a client, even though I'm a tax attorney, I would never tell a client that comes to our firm, I'll do your taxes for you. Okay. An accountant is not authorized and certainly not experienced enough to draft the appropriate legal documents that you need. They are not experienced enough to help you make the decision of what entity is best for you from a legal perspective. They are not in the best position to offer you advice on all of those factors and more. And they don't typically provide you with the information about best practices to avoid liability issues. Okay. Do not trust an accountant that tells you that they will file the business entity for you for $250 or $500 or whatever it is. They should not be doing that. You need to speak with a lawyer, preferably one who's experienced in entity formation, mergers and acquisitions, business tax law, that can help you make the necessary decisions that are best for your particular set of circumstances. This is also not the time to DIY. I've seen many, many people make mistakes that later cost them tens or hundreds of thousands of dollars because they made a mistake, and now they're getting sued, or they had some issue, or they're having a problem with some governmental entity, all because they didn't spend the minimal amount to have an actual attorney help them through the process appropriately. So usually an attorney is going to file the documents for you, is going to get you an EIN, an employer identification number, which is basically your business's social security number. They're going to help you to prepare all of the necessary documents for your business, regardless of whether you're choosing an LLC or some version of a corporation. A lawyer is going to be best suited to help you through that particular workflow. Okay. So very quickly, we'll talk about the different types of entities. And of course, we can answer any questions that you have, but generally speaking, once again, I'm going to say that that entity at the bottom, the LLC, limited liability company, is going to be the correct entity for most people on this webinar. and is going to be the correct entity for most people in general, most business types in general, because of its flexibility, because it offers the exact same limited liability protection if you're following the proper formalities as any other type of limited liability entity. And it's going to offer you the best tax benefit, most likely, for most situations. Okay. So again, starting from the top, sole proprietorship, we talked about this a little bit. One person starts a business, no formalities, no filings, no nothing, but also no protections. Okay. And you also kind of hamstring yourself if you're a sole proprietor because you're not benefiting fully from all of the expenses that you can get, all of the tax benefits that you can get from having a properly filed single member LLC. So you can have a one member LLC. It's called a disregarded entity for tax purposes. Single member LLC is also fine. And it's one person formed an LLC, 100% owner of that LLC, still get all the benefits, still get all the limited liability protection. Really, really good structure for a single or sole proprietor. Okay. A partnership gets a little bit more complex. You can have what's called a general partnership, which is instead of one person, two people decide to, or more decide to go into business together and they have no formalities. Horrible idea for many, many reasons. Horrible idea, but it's possible. You can do that. Don't recommend it. Once again, the minimal cost of setting up a multi-member LLC, multi-member limited liability company, is very minimal compared to the significant risk of going into business with one or more, with another or several other people without a proper structure. Okay. So general partnership can be done just like a sole proprietorship, just more than one person, basically. There are other versions of partnerships, but we won't get into that for the purposes of this webinar. Mainly because any other version, a limited partnership, some structure where you have limited partnerships and general partnerships together, those kind of more complicated structures require a lot of contractual discussion and analysis. And quite frankly, all of those things, all of those tricks that are sort of old school, can be accomplished more effectively and more efficiently by a limited liability company. So again, skipping that part for the sake of time, but also because an LLC is going to cover all of those issues anyways. Now, when we get into corporations, you have, first and foremost, let me just explain, a corporation is a corporation. That's a legal structure to an entity. Whether it's a C and S or otherwise is a tax designation. Okay, so you have a corporation, which is the legal structure to an entity, and that certainly can have one or more shareholders. There are a variety of different ways that we can set up corporations, but generally speaking, we're talking about taxes when you're getting into C or S corporations. For purposes of this discussion, we're not going to focus on C Corps, largely because most people, especially if you're on this webinar, you're not going to benefit from a C Corp. Most likely, an LLC would be the better structure for you if you're considering a C Corp. You could also certainly do an S corporation, which is a pass-through version of a corporation. And there are some estate planning benefits. There are some things you can do with trusts that get really detailed with S corporations from an estate planning perspective. But generally speaking, doing an S corporation is generally no better than doing an LLC, in large part because if you have a limited liability company in the LLC, you can elect to be taxed as an S corporation and get all of those benefits that you're looking for from that tax designation, whether it's minimizing your self-employment taxes. Maybe you've seen stuff like that on the internet or Reddit, social media. You can do all of that with an LLC, checking the box, filing a Form 2553 to elect to be taxed as an S corporation. So we don't necessarily need to file as an S corporation to get those benefits. There's more of a discussion about what exactly we're looking for in terms of transferability, shareholders. A lot of things, again, can be accomplished within the structure of an LLC. So again, I'm going to say as a general, very general statement, one, talk to your specific attorney about your specific set of circumstances, but most of you should be considering an LLC unless there's another really good reason to go in a particular direction. So again, LLC, limited liability company, you get all of the tax benefits that you're looking for. And that's regardless if you're looking for partnership or sole proprietorship tax, you get that in an LLC if you want, or you can elect to be taxed as an S corporation and get the tax benefits of an S corporation within the structure of an LLC as well. So there's the difference here that we have to recognize of the legal structure of the entity, whether it's a corporation, limited liability company, sole proprietorship, partnership, and then the tax designation of that same entity. Okay, so those two things are a little bit interchangeable, but blanket general statement is an LLC can accomplish the majority of what we're looking to do in any of these other types of within the confines of the law, completely legal, and help us to get what we're looking for without so much complexity. So again, which type is most likely right for you? It's always going to depend on your very specific set of circumstances. I would just say, give us a call, do a free initial consultation. We can go over your specific set of circumstances very quickly, talk about the benefits, the pros and cons of which one is right for you, and help you get set up appropriately. Again, generally speaking, the LLC is our preferred entity most of the time, and that's largely because of the flexibility that it offers. That's probably the best perk of the LLC, is that it's very flexible, but also offers you the exact level of limited liability protection that you would get in any other entity. Again, so long as we're properly filing the correct documents, we have the proper documents drafted, and we're following the very specific formalities that we have to follow to protect ourselves. Okay. All of that comes from good guidance from your attorney. So make sure that you're, again, sitting down with your attorney, make sure that they're speaking in a language that you understand very clearly and that they're giving you pragmatic advice about how to practically apply these best practices in your day-to-day so that you can avoid any issues later. Okay. So same liability protection in limited liability company. It has typically less costs, typically less formalities. Typically, it's more flexible, so there's less administrative burden. There's less time trying to manage all the particular formalities. So it tends to be simpler to run a limited liability company. So there's less to remember, less to worry about. Just follow your day-to-day best practices, and you're going to get the same limited liability protection, the tax advantages that you're looking for. And typically an LLC is also going to be the easiest to transfer. So if you're someone who's looking to build something that you eventually can exit from, or that you can eventually transition, in an M&A transaction, sell the business, sell part of the business off, it's typically a little bit more flexible to transfer. Again, in some ways, it really depends on the specific set of circumstances. Okay. We can take a quick break here and maybe look at some of the questions that we have. Okay, so I'll go through the questions here in the chat. So someone is a sole proprietor looking to move to an LLC and potentially have employees in the future. So if they already have an EIN and they want to move to an LLC, that is a fairly complex, they already have an EIN, they're looking to form an LLC. So that's a fairly complex tax situation. That is something that you probably want to set up a initial consultation either with us or with another experienced law firm, so that we can address some of these issues and help you to decide, what's the best fit for you. Okay. So someone's asking if they form an LLC from their existing sole proprietorship, how will this impact filing taxes for this year they've been a sole proprietor all year long. So if they form an LLC, how will that impact their taxes? Well, first and foremost, the LLC only starts from the date that it's officially formed, so it won't impact your prior taxes at all. If you file now before the end of the year, say, the sort of benefit that you would get there is that the expenses that you pay to form the LLC are going to be a tax deduction on your overall taxes, but LLC tax is not going to have any effect on your sole proprietorship activities because you've been operating as a sole proprietor. So until you form the LLC, generally speaking, that's generally not going to really have a major impact on your taxes. So some people are asking if it'd be better to create an LLC in 2024 or wait until 2025. And do we still need to do the BOI reporting? Great question. So first and foremost, let me address the BOI issue. So right now, BOI is on hold. And again, this is why you should be working with a very experienced attorney that knows exactly what they're doing, because the BOI may or may not be active when you form your LLC. So those requirements are currently on hold, but we're in sort of a gray area here from a legal perspective, waiting for some court decisions to come down that will affect BOI reporting and other requirements. Okay. Whether or not it's better to form an LLC in 24 or 25 is really going to depend on your specific set of circumstances. Again, these are really specific circumstances to each individual that's asking these questions. You really need to set up an appointment with an attorney to get answers to those questions. Okay. But great question on the BOI. Can you reimburse yourself for startup costs that are incurred in 2024 if your LLC is formed in 2025? Again, it doesn't really work that way. This is pretty hyper specific to your situation. Reimbursement is not the right terminology. You're looking to expense, not reimburse, because that's not exactly how that transaction works from a tax perspective. So you really want to meet one-on-one with an attorney that can help you. Someone's asking if you're starting a company using ROBS. ROBS is a tax provision that allows, where the Internal Revenue Code and the Treasury Department allow you to roll over your 401k effectively into a C Corp that you own so that you can invest in your own business. So it's a very specific designation. This is a pretty specific question. So if you're working on starting a company using ROBS, which requires a C Corp, that's one of those circumstances where you would need a C Corporation. But before I get the company set up, would you recommend setting up an LLC to start capturing expenses and then changing over to a C Corp afterwards when the ROBS funding is processed? So you cannot go from an LLC to a C Corp. That you cannot make the switch easily from an LLC to a C Corp. What you may be able to do is set up the corporation. I'm not exactly sure what capturing expenses we're talking about and why we would make the change and not just create the C Corp from the beginning. It sounds like there's some gamesmanship going on here, perhaps. And I would generally say that it might not be worth the cost and the administrative burden. Again, specific set of circumstances here with this ROBS and C Corp combination. Feel free to shoot us a quick email so that we can set up a time to discuss. Can you operate under a 1099 with an employer without establishing your own business entity? Yes. So a 1099 has nothing to do with a business or not business. It's a subcontractor designation, and the difference is, are you a subcontractor or an employee? As a 1099, typically, depending on the relationship, so 1099 has to do with the relationship, right, of the entity or individual that's hiring you to do some work. That's a whole other tax discussion in and of itself, and a very specific one. So again, happy to have a discussion and discuss it with you. But typically speaking, you could be a 1099 as an individual, has nothing to do with whether or not you're a sole proprietor or you're just an individual that's a contractor for an entity. If you have some expenses, if you have some more than one client, then as a 1099, you would likely want to create an entity and have an LLC that you would then collect all of those 1099s from. Um, but that's again a specific discussion depending on your particular set of circumstances. Someone's asking, what kind of lawyer do you need to file an LLC? My kind, me. So you can always contact our firm. We can help you to file and form your limited liability company. We do it all for a flat fee that we discuss on a one-on-one basis with each client and make it very straightforward and simple. And we can help you through the entirety of the process. But you want an attorney that's experienced in business, tax, and maybe a few other areas of the law. You also want an attorney, I would say more than anything else, you want an attorney that you feel comfortable with, that is speaking a language that you understand. They're not talking down to you. They're not sort of condescending to you in any way. Um, you want an attorney that you feel comfortable calling or texting or emailing when you need help with something, and that you have a good chemistry with. That's probably more important than anything else, but definitely one that's experienced in business, tax, and again, maybe contracts or a particular area of the law that you're looking for. And certainly an attorney that understands your particular business area, right? So someone who understands the vertical that your business exists in, the industry that your business exists in. So if you're making some kind of food product, whether it's cupcakes or cakes at home, or you're working with a commissary, or you're thinking of starting a restaurant, or you're a budding chef that wants to go out on their own, whatever that may be, you probably want a lawyer that understands the area, the industry, the lingo to some degree, and that again is speaking your language and making your life as easy and comfortable as possible. So again, reach out to us, info@lopeslawllc.com. We're happy to have a free initial consultation with anyone and have a discussion with you. Okay, so back to this. We'll come back to the questions and hopefully get to them throughout the rest of the webinar. So the first documents that you need, and now we're going to shift more towards little by little more towards an LLC, because again, I think for most people here, you're generally speaking going to need an LLC. For the individual talking about ROBs and C Corps, we'll talk a little bit, at least now, in terms of the documents about that as well. So from an LLC perspective, a limited liability company needs an operating agreement. And, if you go hire Rocket Lawyer or LegalZoom or whatever, you're going to get a template. You're not going to get the one-on-one consultation that you would with an actual attorney. Okay. I know they provide you with an attorney remotely, but I've seen the documents that clients have come to us when they're having a problem that were generated by these organizations. They're just not of high quality. Okay. Some of them still have template language and instructional language in there. Some of them are poorly drafted, poorly formatted. Some of them literally the entity name was inserted and nothing else. Not good enough. Okay. It's not worth saving a couple hundred or a few $100s or even $1,000 in order to then later lose tens of hundreds of thousands potentially because of a major mistake. Okay. So proper legal representation is extremely important. Make sure that your documents are being drafted by an experienced attorney. Okay, so operating agreement for a limited liability company, that is true even if you're a single member. Okay, very, very important. There's a lot of risks, a lot of things that can happen, believe it or not, if you don't get this right. If you get sued by somebody and you're hoping that that limited liability protection is going to kick in, and then you go and look and you had an improperly drafted document, you haven't been performing the best practices, and now they can come after your personal assets anyways. Not worth the savings, in my opinion. On the other side of things, if we're creating a corporation, we need a shareholders agreement and we need bylaws. And that is very, very important. both sort of silos of those documents and those entities are really critical as a minimal best practice for those entities. Okay, so again, even if you're a single member LLC, you need an operating agreement. If you choose to file as an S corporation or a C corp, then you're going to need that shareholders agreement. You're going to need those bylaws. If you're doing ROBs, you're going to need a plan administrator. You're going to need plan documents, all sorts of other things. Again, not something to be toyed with. These are major, major consequences if you don't get this right. You'll also need to start up your business an EIN. This is an easy part, but again, your lawyer, if they're helping you through all of this other stuff anyways, the EIN doesn't cost anything extra typically. As I said, our firm does all of this for a flat fee, so it should be included in the process. Very straightforward part of the process. It's basically an EIN's an employer identification number, but you can think of it effectively as the social security number for your business. So you're going to use it on your tax returns. You're going to use it if you do have payroll, but even if you don't have payroll, you're going to use that tax identification number on tax returns, on when you open your bank account. It's the number that ties your entity to basically the IRS and a bunch of other situations. So you will need that. And then last but not least, we're going to need to open up a separate bank account. So again, as I mentioned at the beginning, one of the key best practices, but certainly not the only one, is that you maintain separate books and records. And the core part of that is that you have a separate bank account for your business entity and that all of your business's money funnels through that. And then you have properly set up best practices in place and formalities in place where when you need money as an individual, you're properly paying yourself out of the business and not paying for personal things from the business. Okay, so that's another key area that needs to be addressed when we're helping someone work out the initial phases of their business. Now, before you even meet with your attorney, here's some advice, some free advice on this webinar, or some free information, I should say, so that you can better prepare for that initial meeting and be ready for that meeting before you even have it. Okay. So first and foremost, let's talk about all of the information that we're going to need. You're going to need a name for your business. I will tell you that generally speaking, unless you're a law firm or a doctor or something like that, using your own name in any way for the business is typically not a great idea. And the reason for that is if you're starting a pizza shop, if you're starting a cupcake or cake baking business at home, if you're starting a landscaping business, if you're starting an interior design business, if that business goes big, and you maybe decide, okay, I'm looking for opportunities to scale that business. I'm looking for opportunities to maybe expand the business through franchising or through licensing deals. That's where a lot of the scale comes from, is those types of transactions. That all comes down to intellectual property as well. Okay, so you want to have a name that's trademarkable. You want to have a name that, generally speaking, is protectable from an intellectual property perspective. And the best way to do that is to have a name that is not on the nose and that does not use the founder's name. Okay. So if you're starting a pizza shop, if I was starting a pizza shop, I would not call it Tony's Pizza. That would be a horrible name for a pizza shop because it's not going to be trademarkable. And if it's not trademarkable, I'm going to limit my ability later. If I am successful, I'm going to limit my ability later to turn that into a franchise or to scale that through licensing deals, etc. Okay. The days of Tony Lopes are gone. We can't go that route because we're going to have issues with trademarking, right? And besides, I'm sure more than likely, most of you have seen a Tony's Pizza somewhere, right? So not a great name if other people are already using it, or if it's very on the nose, if it's descriptive of what we're doing. So Tina's Cakes, Tina's Cupcakes, Tina and Tony's Interior Design, not great options for names. Nike, Adidas, things like that, things that are words that are not creative, right? Fanciful or arbitrary, terms that are made up are going to be better names for the company, and then you develop your marketing and your brand around that. Okay, so potential names for your business, I would pick things that are generally speaking not going to be on the nose. Now, if you're a law firm, like my firm, Lopes Law, yeah, it's not anything creative, but for professional services like that, generally speaking, I'm not going to franchise my law firm. If I'm going to scale it, it's going to be done internally. Therefore, we're not as concerned with the naming in those instances. But if I was starting a fashion brand, or if I was starting, a pizza shop or a restaurant concept or something along those lines, you would want something that's generally speaking going to be more trademarkable in the long run. Okay, that's just general advice. Your specific circumstances may dictate more focused analysis. Another tip I can give you for naming purposes is you can always use the first several letters from your first name and the first several letters from your last name, or some combination of that, to come up with a name that is arbitrary and fanciful, that is made up, that's a better name for something like that, right? So Tolo Pizza or something like that. If it was me, Tony Lopes, Tolo Pizza or Antlo Pizza, something like that might be better than Tony's Pizza, for example. So your specific set of circumstances, you're probably going to want a little bit of guidance from an attorney on this as well. We discuss this with every single client to make sure that those name choices that you're coming up with are a good fit for your business, and that you understand these sort of long-term options and maybe make a better decision early on. Much tougher to change this later, much tougher to trademark these things if you don't do it right from the beginning. As far as how many names you want, I would recommend that you have a list of about 3 in order of preference: favorite, second favorite if that one's taken, and then third favorite. Again, if you're using stuff that's arbitrary and fanciful, that's made up, you're going to be in a better position, because more likely than not, those names aren't going to be taken. Okay, on to how much startup cash you need. I know it's great to see, social media content about how you need no money to start a business and all those things. Horrible advice. You need a budget. You need to understand that your business needs cash to survive. So if your answer to that question, how much startup capital do you have, is $0, you're not off to a good start. So the best advice I can give you is budget for legal. You're going to need money for a website. You're going to need money for hosting. You're going to need money for web design, whether it's you or somebody else. You're going to need money for marketing. You're going to need money for all sorts of initial things. Even if it's at the minimum and you're bootstrapping, you're going to need some cash to survive. If you don't have cash on hand to start the business, you need to get creative. You can ask friends or family. That's a popular way to get some investment, but again, guided by a lawyer so that you don't make a mistake. You can also, of course, if you have a great business concept, there are SBA programs, there are grants out there. There are plenty of different resources out there, especially at the startup phase, to help you get launched. And you can do the work to get some of those resources for yourself, but $0 is probably not a great answer for that. So look at your budget, really think through, how much money do I need to spend? Probably add 30% to that number at a minimum to give yourself a little bit of cushion, and then start from there. You also need to consider if you're going to have employees in your first year of operation, and if so, excuse me, how many. Okay, that's an important consideration for a variety of reasons. Are you going to have any partners, in air quotes, any co-founders, any individuals who have an ownership stake in your business? And let me tell you right now, if you do, those partners or other owners, co-founders, really should be coming to the table matching you in intentions. So making sure that we fully understand, this is where we're navigating towards. These are the goals and aspirations that we have, not only personally, but for the business entity as a whole. Make sure that those things match, because when the times get tough, and they will, you really want people who are as motivated and as ambitious as you are to keep rowing in the same direction and not to abandon the ship, which happens more often than not. Secondarily to that, though, before you start giving away ownership stake, really think that through. Really think about, am I willing to be committed to this individual for many, many years if necessary? Am I willing to resolve disputes with this individual? And are we going to be effective in doing so, or are we going to have some problems? So you really got to pick good co-owners, even if they're only, 1%, 2% owners. They can be a nightmare if you make a mistake. Last but not least, last bit of advice is, generally speaking, those co-owners should be bringing a pro rata, meaning percentage based amount of cash to the table. So let's say we're starting with $10,000 as a minimum that we want at the beginning. That makes our life really easy because 100% ownership matches nicely to that 10,000. If you're going to have a 10% owner, that 10% owner better bring $1,000 in cash to the table. Okay. And you, the 90% owner, the other 9,000. Be very reluctant to take on co-owners that say, I'm going to use sweat equity, or I'm going to come to the table and work for my 10%. No, thank you. You either commit for first of all, from the intention perspective, they either commit the money that you're looking to get, again, on a pro rata basis, matching up to that percentage, or they're just not committed. They don't believe in the dream to begin with. So you may not want this individual getting a free, effectively 10% for doing nothing. You have to be very, very careful giving away equity in exchange for some work product or some delivery of services or something like that. Secondarily to that, and what most people don't know, and this includes accountants and most lawyers out there, just frankly don't know this, aren't aware of this. If someone is trading their services in exchange for equity, there are really significant tax ramifications that become a nightmare to deal with. So be hyper aware of that. Work with an attorney that fully understands that. We tend to, the majority of cases, try to talk clients out making that kind of mistake. Sometimes clients still choose to move forward with that, and that's okay. We try to protect them in the best way that we can. But just be aware that giving away equity, especially early on, is going to be an issue and a concern for most people. Okay. And then again, we talked about what state you should form in. I already talked about the myth about forming in Nevada, Delaware, Wyoming because of zero tax. Generally speaking, there are still other costs associated with those states, generally, annual dues or fees and filing requirements, an outside in-state registered agent in those states. So there are all these extra fees that a lot of times just make it administratively overly burdensome and not worth it from a cost-benefit analysis. So a lot of times, the appropriate discussion is, first of all, talk to your attorney and then make a decision based on your particular set of circumstances. But the cost is usually, the benefits are far outweighed by the costs usually. Okay. All right. Some of the other agreements that you may need early on, again, depending on your particular set of circumstances, you might need a master service agreement. Okay, so a master service agreement is effectively an agreement that's designed specifically and custom for your business that you hand to every client that you meet, saying these are the services we're going to provide. Here's the quote. Here's the projected project that we're going to do, the prospectus or an assessment of sorts. And you get them to sign that. It's got some legal protections in there for you. It's going to give you some teeth if you don't get paid. It's also, if you're working with us, we're going to build that agreement using best practices for your business. So if you're talking to us, and let's say you're a contractor, you build houses, or you're a carpenter, you fix houses, you're a tiling specialist, whatever it is, right? You want to have, first of all, you want to make sure that you're compliant with all of the legal regulations, which again, you need to make sure about in your particular area. But secondarily, you're going to have a contract and we're going to have a discussion that says, well, how much are you collecting up front from these clients? And again, if you're saying, I'm not collecting anything up front, I'm just going in, I'm quoting the job, and they're saying, okay, start Monday, and I start, and then 2 weeks later, I get stiffed. They don't pay me. Well, those master services agreements are going to have payment milestones, and we're going to help you to solve some of those headaches and some of those problems before they happen, making your life easier, helping you to collect revenue faster, and helping you to make sure that you're protected with each and every client that you work with. Okay. If you're going to have employees, if you're going to have 1099s, like we talked about a little bit earlier, you're going to need an employment or subcontractor agreement more likely than not in your business. Don't just haphazardly hire these people. Don't just haphazardly engage with people that are going to be a part of your business, a part of your team. A lot of issues can happen. A lot of lawsuits can happen. A lot of unhappy clients can happen. A lot of headaches come from not doing things right in the beginning. You may also want some vendor agreements in place. So all of our businesses, mine included, rely on vendors and vendor relationships. So we should have agreements typically in place with those vendors, even if they're small businesses, to say, okay, this is what we're doing. This is what you're promising to deliver for us in exchange for whatever we're doing, whatever payment we're giving. But here are the terms, and here's what happens if things go wrong. That's what agreements are for, right? Again, intellectual property considerations are important, especially if you're trying to build something that you hope to scale later on. So we want to look at, do you need trademarks? Do you need service marks? Do you need some other intellectual property protections along the way? And then when it comes to agreements, there are things that we can do to solve problems in pre-existing agreements. Again, it's case by case. It depends whether or not we can amend or modify, or maybe we need a new agreement, maybe we need to renegotiate. That all depends on your particular set of circumstances. So make sure you're working with an attorney that can help you through that. Okay. All right. And just last but not least, I always like to talk a little bit about negotiation strategies. So at our firm, we do a lot of representation of clients in agreement negotiations. Sometimes those are pre-existing negotiations that we're trying to get out of. And so we have to kind of negotiate our way out of a bad situation. Sometimes it's a new company is being formed with multiple people, or a new project, a joint venture between two entities is happening, or a vendor and a service provider are looking to do a deal. Whatever the case may be, we do a lot of negotiating on behalf of our clients. So generally speaking, the one thing that I can say that's made us most successful in most circumstances is really focusing holistically on the negotiation. It's not about you. It's not about me. It's all about the collective, the us, right? So we really need to focus on the negotiation, not from the perspective of trying to get all that I can get and cheating the other person out of what they can get, but really more so focusing on what are the mutual goals and objectives of the combined group, right, of this negotiation? And then what are the individual goals and objectives? And is there some commonality there? Is there an area that we can meet in? If there is, great, then let's focus on that. Let's try to get there. If there isn't, how can we get there? And those are the things that we try to do. The other thing is we want to take a collaborative approach. We want to remember that organizations are run by human beings. So we need to think about how we leave people feeling. We need to try to empathize with the other side. That's going to make you more successful in negotiations more often. And we need to focus on building return on relationship. Again, how did we leave people feeling? What's the relationship after the negotiation, rather than ROI, than just dollars and cents? That's important, but it's not the only factor to consider in a negotiation. Generally speaking, we want to be open in our communication, and we want to be transparent with the other side. Of course, we're not going to completely show our cards. We all have internal stakeholders and internal issues that we need to consider as well. So we're not going to completely reveal everything necessarily, but we need to be transparent when we're having a discussion, and be again open in our communication with the other side. That's going to help fortify our relationships. That's going to help us to avoid conflict and add value to the other side so that they'll want to reciprocate for us. It's a two-sided coin. Okay. All right. I will stop there and ask for questions. Please follow at TLopes260. That's my personal account on Instagram, and at Lopes Law LLC on Instagram. Again, once again, contact us, info@lopeslawllc.com, or you can call that number to schedule a time to do a free initial consultation.
Okay. So before everyone leave, there's a 4 question survey about today's webinar and the chat. We value your feedback and use it to improve our events in the future. This is also required by the SBA, our funders. So we continue to allow us to offer no cost workshops. A follow-up email will be sent within 2 to 3 business days to attendees. And thank you everyone for joining today's webinar.